Good morning. We are here to discuss the first Parsha of the third volume of the Torah, Parshas VaYikra. We are titling today's class as The Ultimate Calling. This month, the month of Adar, and this is going to be the last shiur for the month of Adar. Month of Adar is sponsored by Dr. Leonard Meril and Horowitz, Le'alios Neshamos, his mother Miriam Sarah Basar Yeleib, her father Harav Tzvi Akiva ben Harav Moshe Chaim, and grandparents Shlomo ben Chaim Yisroel and Sarah Bas Avraham Zalman HaKohen. These parents and grandparents have tremendous benefit from their descendants and our collective Torah learning. Additionally, month of Adar is also dedicated to Aliyas Neshamos of special relatives, Moshe Aryeh ben Avraham Yosef, Hersh Mayer ben Moshe Aryeh, and Yitzchak Elchonon ben Chaim Yisroel. This week's class is dedicated for Refu'ah Shalema, for Sarah Rivka Bas Fryda, Perel, Sasha Bas Meril Rivka, Shlomo ben Baila, Malka, Sarah Bas Faiga Rachel, Simcha, Isaac ben Etel Bluma, and Moshe ben Simcha. And of course, the best thing for the world is Torah study, and we definitely daven that all of these prayers should be answered, and for all Cholei Yisrael, and for all Neshamos that should have an Aliyah. And I would like to also make a specific point of discussing in our class today how we can hopefully get to a much better future, and that our actions that we do for ourselves as well as for people in need, for Refu'ah and or other such prayers or blessings that we are seeking, hopefully how we can do something more concrete about all to make everything that we're doing more impactful. And on that subject, of course, special thank you to all of our sponsors. If anybody is interested in either the months of Iyar, Sivan, or Tammuz, please let me know at your earliest convenience. I like to take care of it well in advance if possible. So we are witnessing incredible goings on throughout the globe. President Trump has definitely taken an initiative that involves many countries. And whether you like that or not, whether you're on the conservative side or the more liberal side, no matter what, big things are happening. And what I'd like to do today is discuss what I think is on the minds of many of us that attend these classes or similar types of, Torah forays, and that is, how can we finally be done with all the chaos? It kind of seems like no matter how many leaders of, the Iranian terrorist totalitarian regime are killed, there's always more that are, cropping up and needing to be dealt with. And for us that are truly looking to have a different focus in life, other than war and violence and the need to defend ourselves and fight for existential survival, we would like to have an answer to the question of when will it all finally end. And normally the way that we think of that is when Mashiach comes. And then we ask the question, how do we bring Mashiach? And that's why so many of us are constantly enamored with the concept of the end of days, and maybe this is what's happening. What I'd like to do today is just simply talk about what the Torah tells us is necessary here in the third volume of the Torah as a means of approaching Hashem. And hopefully we can learn from the way the Torah phrases what it teaches us here at Sefer VaYikra, and apply that in a meaningful way to our lives so that we can truly advance towards a final conclusion to all of this chaos, violence, and really tremendous suffering. So an overview question that is important, and one that I focus on often, is that the third volume of the Torah, which in English or Greek, if you will, is translated as Leviticus, meaning pertaining to the tribe of Levi, or alternatively, in the words of our sages, Toras Kohanim, which is the laws of or the teachings of the Kohanim, is very, very different than the Hebrew word Vayikra. The Hebrew word Vayikra means "and he called." It's referring to Hashem calling to Moshe with the first communication from an established, built tabernacle. But that's radically different. The word Vayikra, "and he called," is completely a different thing than the teachings or the laws of the Kohanim, or that which pertains to the tribe of Levi. And quite frankly, that which pertains to the tribe of Levi or the laws of the Kohanim does seem much more apt. In fact, most of the laws of services, including sacrifices, as well as ritual purities and impurities, of which the Kohen, the Levi, and the Jew needs to be careful about, but the main responsibility of which is on the tribe of Levi to maintain that sanctity and to do the services, does fall, like we said, to the tribe of Levi and the Kohanim. That seems to be a much more generically appropriate description of what's, in a broad sweeping way of what's happening here in the third volume of the Torah. So why, in fact, do we name this sefer "And He Called," which is nondescript at best? That is question number one, and it is an overview question. Question number two is that there is a famous Rashi at the beginning of the Parsha, and there's also a famous teaching from the Baal HaTurim at the beginning of the Parsha that always needs really good explanation. Rashi tells us that this language of calling is a language that was used every time that Hashem communicated with Moshe. Before instructing Moshe, let's say as a commandment, the word tzivoy or mitzvah, which is a commandment, Hashem first called to Moshe. And anytime it says Hashem said to Moshe, let's say Amira or Dibor speaking to Moshe, it's always preceded by calling. And says Rashi that this is a language of love. Calling is a language of love. What does that mean, that it's a language of love? And why was it necessary for Hashem to always call to Moshe before speaking to Moshe? But that's what Rashi learns on this sentence. And then Rashi makes another really stark and foundational point, is that this language of calling is specifically for the prophets of the Jewish people. Right now we're talking about Moshe, but Rashi implies that this applies to the prophets of the Jewish people, that they are called, but to the non-Jewish prophets of the world, i.e., for example, Bilam, over there the word that is used is a similar Hebrew word, but it's a radically different word. It's VaYikra, which does not mean "and he called," it means "and he happened," meaning Hashem happened to speak to this prophet, whereas by the Jewish prophets it's "and he called," and explains Rashi why is that distinction the way that it's characterized, because to the prophets of the nations of the world, it's a language that's arai, which means temporary, or tum'ah, which means impurity. And that's the way, in fact, Hashem speaks to Bilam. And that, of course, begs explanation. What does it mean that Hashem happens to speak to the prophets of the world? Hashem doesn't happen to speak to them. Hashem obviously does only things that are, intentional. So what does it mean to happen to speak to them? Why would he phrase it as though he's happening to speak to them? But also, what does it mean temporary? All the communications with Hashem are temporary, right? Nobody is in a always communicating state with Hashem. Even Moshe Rabbeinu needed to be on call for Hashem to be available to be spoken, but he wasn't always in communication with Hashem. So what does Rashi mean that it's temporary versus what when it comes to the Jewish people? So that needs a lot of explanation. But specifically to ask over here, why is this the only time that we're focused on this specific meaning? We have the word Vayikra earlier in the Torah. It says Elokim, Hashem called to Moshe from Mount Sinai. We don't have this whole explanation by Rashi. Also, we have other words that the Torah tells us, and we don't, tell us. Rashi doesn't tell us anywhere else. Every time Hashem spoke to Moshe, you should know, even though it says Vayomer, and he said really it was preceded by a calling. This is the only time that Rashi tells us. So why over here? Now, also specifically, the Baal HaTurim, that other commentary to which I alluded, says that you'll notice that the aleph in the word Vayikra is small. It's diminutive. Says the Baal HaTurim, why is this? Because Moshe did not want to write the word Vayikra. And Hashem apparently said to him, okay, write. And he called to Moshe, Vayikra. Moshe was hesitant to do that. He wanted to write Vayikar, which is the language of temporary and happenstance that Hashem uses for the prophets of the world. He was more comfortable with that. And Hashem said, no, it has to be Vayikra. So Moshe wrote a small aleph indicating his discomfort with being called with the word kara. And the question is, what makes Moshe Rabbeinu so uncomfortable? And why is this the only time that we find that Moshe Rabbeinu was uncomfortable with how Hashem is addressing him? Again, we have the word VaYikra earlier. Why over here is Moshe saying, no, it's too much for me. It's like, I don't deserve such an honor, for example. Why over here, not anywhere else? But also, if really the issue is Moshe's self-aggrandizement and Moshe's concerned for his own arrogance, then why is it okay for Moshe to write a sentence in Parshas VaYikra which says, and the man Moshe was the most humble person on the face of the earth? He apparently didn't have any problem with that sentence. He writes that without any amelioration, changing the syntax or the sizes of the letters. And that's a pretty, if you'll pardon my saying though, it sounds like a pretty bombastic statement, and but to be written by the person himself. And I am the most humble person on the face of the earth. And now let's discuss more. That is seemingly a good place for Moshe to be uncomfortable. Why is he uncomfortable instead here in this first word of the third volume of the Torah, VaYikra? So that is that set of questions. Now, another very interesting teaching relating to the offerings is that the Torah tells us in these opening paragraphs that there are donation offerings of different types. We have the larger animal burnt offering, donation offering, which is a bull or a cow, or a sheep or a ram. So we have the larger offering animals. Then you have the fowl offerings, different types of birds that are allowed to be brought on the altar. And then finally, we have the flour donation offerings. Those are 4 types of donation offerings that the person is intending simply just because to bring themselves closer to Hashem, they're bringing an offering, like the word korban implies, to come closer. And the Torah uses a unique word by the flour offering of donation that the Torah does not use by the other larger animals or fowl, and that word is nefesh, soul. So says Rashi that the Torah says by the flour offering, the nefesh ki sakri, when a soul will bring close. So Rashi says, why is this the only one of these donation offerings that the word soul, referring to the person bringing it, is being used? So Rashi explains, because who is likely to bring a flour offering as opposed to an animal or fowl offering? The answer is a poor person. And the Torah is telling us that I want you to know, says Hashem, that when a poor person brings a flour offering, it's as if, in my eyes, I consider it as if, says Hashem, that he has brought his soul on the altar. The poor person has given his soul. He brings some flour and oil and whatever it is. That's considered as if he brings his soul. Now, the typical understanding of that Rashi, which I think is a gross misunderstanding and a really bad miscalculation, is that what Rashi is explaining in noting that this word v'nefesh is out of place is that, look, a poor person can't afford much. And he can't even afford this flour offering. And therefore, if he brings something that he can't afford, well, that's like he brings his soul. I think that that's most people's understanding of that Rashi. But my issue with that, and I really think it's a mistake, is that then it's not about the stature or the financial status of the person bringing, it's about the amount that the person can afford, right? So if a wealthier person brings a very expensive animal that is equal to the lack of affordability of the poor person in a proportional sense, then it should also be like he's bringing his soul. So why is it only by the poor person that we're saying that if he brings an offering that's a flour offering, it's as if he's offered everything, it's as if he's offered his soul? It should be true by anybody, and it's just a question of, are you bringing something that's a real ouch, this hurts to donate, it's really going to affect the food on my table, so to speak? If that's the case, so then it should be the same by everyone. And if it's not the case, and the poor person can afford a flour offering, like a rich person can afford a bull offering, he can have flour and water and oil for himself, he can have flour and water and oil for the altar. Okay, so then why is it considered as if he has brought his soul? So what's going on with this teaching? That's that question. So I would like to suggest that we need to do a deep dive on what does it mean to call and why that is such a significant word. Now, the first time that the Torah uses the word call, the Torah tells us that Hashem called he called the light day and the darkness night. That's the first time the Torah uses the word call. Why is that significant, and what does that teach us about the word calling? I suggest that creation, by definition, is something removed from Hashem. It's distant from him. And when Hashem is calling to the light day, what he's saying is that a way to get close to me, a way to bridge the distance of creation between God and man, is through light. And even at night, which is not really the best medium for getting close to Hashem, it's also that Hashem wants a connection even at night. So he's calling the darkness night, but he's acknowledging that that's not the main area of man's activity. As we all know, the main area of man's activity is the daytime. And what Hashem is saying is that your main activity as a human, a created being of Hashem, to connect to Hashem, is in the day. And that medium is light, because it is in the medium of light that we most closely will be able to connect to Hashem. Now, one simple way to understand that is when there's light, we can become other-centered. We can think about what's outside of us. And when there's darkness, we become very self-centered, and it's very hard for us to see outside of us. That's both in a physical and a spiritual sense. The more brightness that a person has, even in a spiritual sense, allows the person to radiate and to be outwardly focused, whereas the more darkness a person has, they are more insular and more self-centered. Okay, so that's just the beginning. There, in theory, is a lot more to be said on that, but we're not going to do that. The second time, or let me put it this way, the next time that we see calling as a major kind of landmark in the Torah is that Hashem brings the animals to man for man to call them names. So when we see the first time that man is calling, is when man is given the job to call the animals by name, to name them, to identify them. And so I'd like to suggest that over there, man and animal are very different. They're distinct and separate from each other and even distant from one another. But when man is given the task of calling animals by name, his job is to connect to them, to understand them, to identify them, and then to also get involved in their usefulness. And so that bridges the distance between animals and man. And let's remember at this time as well that animals were not meant to be eaten. So it wasn't about man calling them so that he would know what to have for supper, although that is also a use of animals, but it was simply to know what they are and their usefulness in creation. And that job is man's job, to connect to the animals and give them their usefulness. That's the second time. The third time that's a landmark calling is the first time that Hashem calls to man, and this is going to be the most indicative, and that is Hashem calls to man, and he says, Ayeka, where are you? So immediately after the sin, Hashem is acknowledging that man has disappeared from the closeness with Hashem, from the obviousness of the connection, to where Hashem is saying, where are you? You're lost. You're not connected to me. And in so doing, Hashem is opening a line of communication, but nonetheless, Hashem is acknowledging the distance. So, therefore, calling means that Hashem is making himself available to bridge the distance caused by man, as in the where are you? Now, ultimately, man has to participate in that. He has to be answering the call. And in an ideal world, he's bringing himself closer to Hashem when Hashem is making himself available to, because he's calling. So therefore, I would suggest that the wording of VaYikra as the opening of the third Sefer is specifically indicating that now that there's a tabernacle and there's a place where Hashem can rest, Hashem wants to offer to bridge this gap, this distance that exists between man and Hashem, and therefore Hashem is calling to the Jewish people to bridge that gap. Now, the appropriate response when a person is called in a loving way, and now we understand what it means in a loving way, I'm interested in getting closer and overcoming the distance that we have, a person should want to bring themselves close. And therefore, the Torah says, after that, when a man will want to bring close from you an offering, which is the word karov, karban, karov, a closeness, he wants to bring something that will bridge that gap of distance, that is the opening of Sefer VaYikra. But most importantly, it's an offering that is not coming for a specific reason. It's not coming for a specific sin. It's not coming because a person is being demanded, give something. It's coming simply as a way to achieve closeness. That is the purpose of the opening paragraphs in Sefer VaYikra, and that's why we're talking about the donation offerings. And so therefore, the calling of Sefer VaYikra is Hashem catalyzing and making himself available to bridge the distance caused by man in the where are you acknowledgement of sin, where Hashem is acknowledging that man has sinned, nonetheless opening up a line of communication. Plus, Sefer VaYikra is also the intention for this closeness to be infinitely pursued by Hashem being present in the Mishkan and making himself available for all the closeness that the Jewish people want to pursue. Now, what's very interesting is that this first sentence is technically not Hashem calling to the Jewish people, it's Hashem calling to Moshe. And why is that? If the goal is a relationship with the Jewish people, why is Hashem calling to Moshe? And the answer is because Moshe is the main reason that we Jewish people have the opportunity to be close to Hashem. Because if not for Moshe Rabbeinu, because of the sin of the golden calf, we would have been destroyed. So it's only by way of Moshe that this relationship of closeness and bridging the gap is being offered to the Jewish people. It's only because of him. And that is true. But the sentence also makes it very clear that the purpose of the communication with Moshe is to speak to the Jewish people. We know this in other places in the Torah as well, but the first sentence explicitly says it. Because the sentence says, and he called to Moshe, and he said to him, and he spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, meaning to say over to the Jewish people, the offering of offerings. That was the point of the sentence. Hashem is coming to convey to Moshe, who is the principal reason why Hashem is available to us and making the call to bridge this gap, to say to the Jewish people, here's the offering of coming close, and that's called offerings. Come close, karbanot. That is what Hashem is telling Moshe. Now Moshe is highly uncomfortable with him seeming, with himself seeming like he is the subject of Hashem's communication. Because since this sentence is the ultimate calling, it's the ultimate offer of a permanent mechanism that we can bridge the distance between us and Hashem. First of all, the distance that we created before, meaning as man sinning, etc. Second of all, the distance that naturally exists between Hashem and man. Third of all, if we sin again, which the rest of the Parsha discusses, what we do when we sin. And again in Yom Kippur, which is also in this Sefer in Parshas VaYikra, Hashem is making this a permanent feature of the relationship that we can overcome the distance because Moshe demanded that Hashem do this with not him and his descendants, but with the entire Jewish people. Moshe is very uncomfortable with taking that credit. He doesn't want to be the one that is seen as having this loving relationship where Hashem is saying we can become infinitely close. And he wants it to just be, listen, I'm just like a prophet of the world. the nations of the world. I'm just a facilitator. I'm just a liaison. And Hashem says, it's true, you are a liaison, because the main purpose of my communication is with the entire nation. But nonetheless, because you are the reason that there's a Jewish people, it needs to be understood that the permanence of my relationship with the Jewish people is because of you. And now we understand the concept of calling as permanent versus calling as temporary. Calling as permanence means that the goal is forever. So a relationship, a good way to say this would be a real relationship, right? REAL relationship. A real relationship is by definition not temporary. That's really the gorgeous, sublime feature of a relationship. A true relationship is not transactional. A true relationship is an experience of building something now and building on it for the forever, for the infinite future. That's what a relationship really ought to be. Every other relationship, like a business relationship, a transactional relationship, a relationship that's dependent on a reason, it very quickly evaporates, just like the Friends of Iran. That's not a real relationship. They don't see the world the same way. They're not trying to build the same things. They're just trying to use each other for what they need for now. That's by definition temporary. That's by definition unholy. And that's the way Hashem communicates with the prophets of the world. Hashem's goal in communicating with the prophets of the world is not to establish a permanent relationship with them. It's for now, there's a reason to speak. But Hashem speaking to the prophets of the Jewish people is always for the long-term interest of building this permanent relationship with the Jewish people. Now, of course, the relationship that the Jewish people have of permanence is made available to other people who want to attach to the Jewish people to convert and to be part of that long-term relationship. That's true, but that's not, what's being done when Hashem speaks to the prophets of the Jewish people. That just becomes a natural corollary. So Moshe is the main reason why this interest exists on the part of Hashem, despite the failing of the golden calf. Nonetheless, Moshe is the liaison, not the principal, and the Jewish nation is the principal. Therefore, the small aleph represents Moshe's critical role, but that Moshe, is not the subject of the distance that Hashem is looking to bridge. And that's why the entire sentence is built around the idea of what Moshe will hear from Hashem and then convey to the Jewish people. But now we get to the ultimate kicker. And the ultimate kicker is, what does it take from us, the ones being called, to bridge the gap? Where is the real distance being created or ratified or concretized and becoming more of a permanent fixture of distance? And how can we overcome that wall or those blocking points that are entrenching the distance and overcome them so that we can instead hope for closeness and actually begin to achieve a much higher level of closeness with Hashem? And my answer is this. The word that the Torah uses that we mentioned before by the poor person is the word nefesh. We're going to come back and explain how it applies to the question of the poor person. But let's understand what the word nefesh is. Nefesh is a soul, and we have other words for soul in the Torah. But really, the word nefesh implies a respite and a coming to ease and calm and restfulness that is comfortable. So, for example, in the word vayinafash, where the Torah tells us that on the seventh day there was an ease, there was a soul restfulness for Hashem. Kivo shavas mikol malachto and vayinafash. When it is that we talk about that Hashem has Shabbos, it's also a coming of ease to Hashem. So Rashi tells us in Parshas Kisisa, vayinafash is like a person who's taking a deep breath, coming down from hard labor and getting to a place of restfulness. That's what the word nefesh means, and therefore it can also relate to breathing, but it's specifically like the kind of breathing that happens, when a person is calming down. So the aspect of soul of a person that is nefesh is the aspect of soul that a person feels at ease with who they are. They're comfortable. They feel, yeah, this is my new you. This is where I am comfortable. I am not disturbed. Now, incredibly interesting is that we have a commandment one time a year to give pain to that nefesh, and that's called Yom Kippur. The laws of restrictions on Yom Kippur are called Inui Nefesh, the affliction of the soul. Now, why would we want to be giving our soul affliction? That doesn't seem to make sense. But that is the exact wording of the Torah. In fact, the Torah says, any nefesh that will not make itself afflicted on the Day of Atonement is cut off. Now, it'd be one thing if you told me any soul that indulges their body on Yom Kippur should be cut off. Why are we saying any person that does not afflict their soul is cut off? That doesn't seem to apply. Yom Kippur is a day of soul. It's a day of spirituality. Why should I be afflicting my soul? And the answer is because, unfortunately, we have become very comfortable with unhealthy souls. That's the problem. When we feel comfortable in being callous with another human being and not talking sensitively to another human being, that's not our physical body being comfortable, that's our soul being comfortable. And that's bad. Our soul should not be at ease when we are insulting or not kind to other people. But unfortunately, some of us are. Our soul should not be comfortable with being physically unhealthy because it prevents us from growing and pursuing more important things. Our soul should not be comfortable with that. When we speak of a couch potato, they're very comfortable with being a couch potato. A soul should not be comfortable with that. And to the extent that we are very comfortable with our animalistic desires and engaging in them and indulging them, it's not only a physical body problem, it's a soul, it's a nefesh problem. The part of our soul that's comfortable with those things is what the nefesh is. And restoring the nefesh is sometimes needing to eat something because our body is so weak that we can't compute and we can't do the more important things. That's also a soul quality, not just a physical quality. So therefore, what the Torah is telling us is that if a person really wants to break the walls, the barriers that distance themselves from Hashem, or if a person wants to bridge this gap and get closer to Hashem, the most important thing that a person needs to do is to remove himself from his comfortable soul experience of his animal side. Meaning, the more comfortable that we are with our physical animal side is exactly the part that we need to sacrifice if we really want to connect to Hashem. That is what we need to be willing to literally give up. So what does that mean? For most of us, it's unfortunately not that hard to understand. For example, many of us can't stand the thought of not eating meat or chicken at least once a week. Many of us cannot stand that. That's what makes us comfortable physically, and therefore our soul, so to speak, requires that. That's not good. That's not okay. That doesn't mean that eating meat or chicken are wrong, right? We're talking about kosher, but we shouldn't feel like that's what we need in order to be okay. In order to be okay, physically okay, in order for me to be in my milieu of nefesh, that I need that. That should not be okay. Now, of course, there are much more extreme versions of that. I'm just giving you that as an example. For many people, it's either other very extreme physical pleasures, right? Kind of, it has to be the perfect temperature. It has to be the perfect fabric. It has to be the perfect car. It has to be, right? All these things could be, otherwise I'm just not comfortable. I can't operate because I'm not comfortable. That's not okay. But more subtle and more important than that is that most of us are really comfortable with acting out of instinct instead of out of thinking and choosing. And what animalistic really represents is I bow to my instincts and I don't need to process differently than my instincts. That's what animalistic really means. And the best examples of that in the animal world are the larger, more grossly, so to speak, proportioned domesticated animals and they just do whatever they need to do as they need to do it, and you don't sense the vibrancy even of wild animals. I'm not going to get so much into that now, but the domestic animal, which is what the Torah is starting with as sacrifice, represents the part of a human being that doesn't even seek aspirationally anything. They're just comfortable just existing. I just exist. I eat, I drink, I do whatever makes me feel pleasurable. I take care of whatever I need in order to live, and that's my life. And what the Torah is saying, if you want to get close to Hashem, you need to sacrifice that comfort. You need to say, no, that's not what I want to be as a human being. And so therefore, it's not about the amount of money that a person spends to bring a large animal, but it's about the concept of relegating the animal side of myself and recognizing that the consumption, or in other words, being consumed with needing that kind of animal living, I am offering that to Hashem. I am saying, Hashem, that's not what I need. What I actually need, what I really need, is to come close to you, to bridge that gap. That's what I really need. Now, is that a high level? Yes, that's a high level. But the Torah opens exactly with that high level as a way of expressing that that's what the sacrifices are supposed to yield. That we have a soul that is not comfortable with being an animal. And I demonstrate that by the offering that I bring. So, a poor person who can't afford an animal can't use the animal as the symbol of what he's doing. He can't afford the animal. So the animal is not what he can use as a concept. It's not about can he afford it. It's about what is the real symbolism of the sacrifice. And the real symbolism of the sacrifice is that I am conquering my animalistic side and instead saying I want to relegate that, and I want to choose to live in a nefesh space where what makes me comfortable is the fact that I'm in communication with you. Let me give you a real practical example. Have you ever had a fight with anybody close to you? Okay, I'm going to assume the answer is yes. You're not comfortable. You're not comfortable until it's resolved. I just dealt with this with somebody yesterday. They were so uncomfortable about something that they did. They just had to take action. They had to fix it right now. They had to deal with it right now because they couldn't live with themselves because of what they did to somebody else. They're not comfortable. Now, unfortunately, we're all comfortable in our distance from Hashem. We're okay. It's okay. We're okay. Maybe on Yom Kippur I'll do a little better. How many times have we thought about that? Maybe on Yom Kippur I'll do a little better. No, we have to say we're not comfortable with that. So when a poor person brings his flour offering, he's just bringing bread and water. There's no symbolism of I'm relegating my animal side. It's just I'm giving flowers. So it says the Torah, as long as his intention is to make himself distant from his animalistic way of being, Hashem considers it as if he brought his soul. But that's true by everyone, because that's the goal of bringing the offering. That the soul, I'm offering my comfort of what I think makes me comfortable and what feels right now to make me comfortable, to be truly comfortable, which is to be in a connection with you. And so that's what I think the Torah is telling us by telling us that Hashem considers the poor person as if he's bringing their soul. And so the bottom line is, if we want to get to an ultimate conclusion where we shouldn't need to sacrifice our soldiers and our people in order to survive, that we shouldn't need to constantly worry about being in a bomb shelter and being woken up in the middle of the night, and that we shouldn't need to worry about where we can live without getting attacked for being a Jew. We have to sacrifice the side of ourselves that's comfortable with being distant from Hashem. We have to end that. So concretely, what does that mean? We all have the desires that we know are controlling us. We truly need to diminish and get rid of those behaviors that indulge in those desires. That's what we need to do. And every person has them. Whether it's a food or it's something illicit that the Torah says is not allowed, or even that which the Torah says is not recommended, even if it's, a gray area, so to speak. but it's nonetheless not recommended. That's something that we all need to get much more comfortable with changing. Because otherwise, we're not responding to Hashem calling for us. Can we see a greater calling for our nation in the last 3 years than where we're at today with the enemies and where they're at today? Hashem is calling us. And I'm not talking about the just, simplistic way of looking. Hashem is calling us to Eretz Yisrael. There's a much more profound calling that is happening. Hashem is calling us to be close to Him. And Hashem is saying, this is the risk that you're running by not making that choice. I can't be fully present in this world. I can't be the king of this world that's present in this world, that is intervening in this world, if you're comfortable with the distance. And therefore, the violence and the anti-Semitism will definitely continue happening. Until you're ready to make yourselves uncomfortable with the distance and make the necessary sacrifices and changes to live in the pursuit of the closeness, of the permanence of the relationship, of the purity of the relationship, and the truth is, of the sublime ecstasy and joy of the relationship. And in many ways, that is what Pesach celebrates. We're not going to get into that so much today, but just pay attention, note that the end of the Pesach Seder is all about blissful, ecstatic singing over the relationship with Hashem. But we don't get that unless we're actually going to make true that our soul should not be comfortable with the distance that these indulgences and that these behaviors necessarily create. It can't happen until we're really willing to bring ourselves close in the most profound ways of not being comfortable with just instinctive acting instead of thinking and choosing acting without recognizing if we're hurting other people, if we're hurting Hashem, if we're hurting the long-term agenda of Hashem has for the world. We're all basically fairly comfortable with all of that much of the time, tragically. And the calling from Hashem is, look, I'm doing everything I can to make myself available. I made myself permanent in the tabernacle. Hashem still has a presence in the land of Israel. Hashem is actually with us in our shuls wherever we go. The question is, are we pursuing the closeness in a real way, or are we allowing ourselves to live in the separation in a comfortable way? So God willing, we should understand from Moshe's lesson, the greatest acknowledgement that Moshe could ever receive is the fact that Hashem loves him and Hashem wants a permanent relationship with him. And Hashem has done that for the Jewish people. A big lie that has been taught in the world is that Hashem has stopped that with the Jewish people. That's the reason that some other religions have said that, it's not true, that the Jewish people have this permanent, unbreakable relationship with Hashem. But of course, it is true. And all you need to do is look at current events to know that it's true. And now you need to look at current events and see how much Hashem wants it, and are we responding in kind or not? So with that, we'll conclude. I'll take questions and comments. Let me just mention that my father is saying the class today. So please, in just under 15 minutes, zoom over to the other link.
Thanks, Akiva. Good class. Good class.
Thank you.
All right. Get out of here.
Anybody with a question or comment?
Could somebody send over the link again to one of the groups?
Okay, yes, I'll put it on the chat. God willing, okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'll send it to you, everyone. Send it to you. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day, everyone. A great week.
Thank you,
All the very best.
Good to call you.
Yes.